Remember when the most dangerous thing in a suburban house wasn't the wiring, the pool, or even the guy that sold you the place, but a bedroom closet that quietly doubled as a doorway to wherever the dead may roam? That was Poltergeist. MGM released it on June 4th, 1982, 1 week before E.T. Officially directed by Tobe Hooper and produced by Steven Spielberg, who also came up with the story and shares the screenplay credit. To this day, nobody fully agrees where one man's job ended and the other's began, and we'll get into that mess. Craig T. Nelson plays Steve Freeling, a suburban dad who sells the exact kind of houses he probably should have read the fine print on himself. JoBeth Williams is Diane, who spends the back half of this movie negotiating with the dead for custody of her own daughter. Heather O'Rourke is 5-year-old Carol and the only person in that house the ghosts have any interest in talking to. And Zelda Rubinstein is Tangina, the medium who shows up 2/3 of the way in and instantly outranks everybody else on screen. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about Poltergeist you probably didn't know, and the single most famous scare in this movie turns out to be a lie from both ends that's been sitting in every copy since 1982. Number 15. Drew Barrymore almost played Carol, and imagine losing one of the biggest roles of the decade and accidentally landing an even bigger one on the same lot in the same week. That's exactly what happened to Drew Barrymore. She read for Carol and during the 1981 casting process and was a genuine contender. But Spielberg had something very specific in mind, and he found it somewhere nobody was holding auditions. 5-year-old Heather O'Rourke was having lunch in the MGM commissary with her mother while her older sister was on the lot shooting pennies from heaven. Spielberg finished his meal, walked over to their table, and asked the family to bring the little girl in. She bombed the first audition. He handed her a stuffed animal, hoping for terror, and got giggles instead. Wrong bait entirely. So he had her come back with a scary storybook, asked her to scream, and she screamed until she started crying. That did it. Barrymore didn't go home empty-handed, though. Spielberg had a second Family in Peril movie queued up right behind this one, so he slid her into E.T. as Gertie, the role that would make her a star. One lunch break in one commissary, and two of the biggest movies of the decade got their faces. Number 14. Spielberg tried to get Stephen King. Spielberg went straight at the biggest name in horror when building Poltergeist, hoping King would come on and work the script with him. King was interested. King was also on a ship crossing the Atlantic to England. No internet, no cell phones, just a slow boat and a filmmaker waiting on an answer that wasn't coming fast enough. By the time King got word and could respond, Spielberg had already moved on and brought in Michael Grays and Mark Victor to write it alongside him. Both men told the story exactly that way decades later, and neither one blamed the other. A simple communication breakdown. That's all it took. The two have still never worked together, not for lack of wanting to. In 1982, Spielberg optioned King's novel The Talisman outright before the book was even published and has owned it ever since, mentioning every few years that he still hopes to make it someday. Two giants of American entertainment, and the closest they ever got was a transatlantic boat with no phone on it. Number 13. The skeletons in the pool were real. Diane Freeling gets dragged into a muddy half-dug swimming pool and comes up surrounded by skeletal hands clawing out of the earth around her. Those skeletons weren't built by anyone on the crew. They were real human bones. Effects artist Craig Reardon ordered them straight out of a biological supply catalog, the same kind of classroom skeletons that hang in anatomy labs, because in 1981 real human bones were actually cheaper to purchase than high-quality fakes were to construct. 13 of them in total. Reardon and his collaborator Michael McCracken then sculpted decay directly onto the actual skulls, casting foam rubber masks over real bone until each one looked like something ripped from an old horror comic. JoBeth Williams spent 4 or 5 days down in that mud screaming and thrashing, assuming the entire time she was surrounded by plastic props. She did not find out the truth on set. Years later, she ran into one of the effects guys and told him what an incredible job they'd done building all those skeletons. He told her nobody built them. The unease outlasted the production. Williams has said it hung over the cast badly enough that when Poltergeist 2 began filming, co-star Will Sampson, a Muskogee Creek medicine man in real life, performed a full exorcism on set alone in the middle of the night. Number 12. The clown scene almost became a real emergency. Robbie Freeling's clown doll is the single prop most responsible for an entire generation developing a fear of clowns, and shooting the scene where it drags him under the bed came uncomfortably close to a genuine on-set emergency. Oliver Robbins, who played Robbie, was 10 years old. There was no CGI to fall back on, so the kid had to physically wrestle a full-sized mechanical puppet. During the strangling beat, the clown's arms closed around his throat and kept tightening on their own. Robbins started saying he couldn't breathe. Everyone watching assumed he was acting his heart out. Spielberg reportedly kept encouraging him, telling him he was doing great, right up until he noticed the boy's face was changing color. Then he ran in and physically pried the arms loose. Robbins couldn't confirm any of it when asked years later. He said he'd heard the story plenty of times but has absolutely no memory of it and figures he probably blacked out. The most frightening near disaster on this production is a story everyone knows except the 10-year-old it happened to. Number 11. Nobody wrote the face-ripping scene. Marty hallucinating that he's tearing his own face apart in a bathroom mirror is the image this movie gets remembered for above everything else. A screenwriter would anchor an entire film around that one moment, but nobody actually wrote it. The bathroom scene existed in the script. The face-ripping did not. It was invented on the spot by Michael McCracken, Craig Reardon's collaborator on the makeup effects, while the crew was already set up and shooting other gags in that same sequence. We only know this because a lawsuit years later forced the filmmakers to explain under oath exactly who came up with what. McCracken received his makeup credit. He never received credit for the idea itself. The most referenced scare in the entire movie technically belongs to nobody by name on paper. Number 10. The marijuana scene was shot with oregano. Before the hauntings turned violent, Poltergeist stops everything for one quiet domestic scene. Steve and Diane, alone in bed after the kids are finally down, pass a joint back and forth and slowly dissolve into helpless giggling. JoBeth Williams and Craig T. Nelson weren't smoking anything real. They rolled the joints with oregano and committed fully to puffing away anyway. Almost none of the good material in that scene was scripted either. Nelson had a background in comedy writing and stand-up, so Hooper and Spielberg simply let the two of them run. Nelson came up with the bit where he sucks his stomach in and then lets it drop, and Williams has said that one sent her into genuine hysterics. After enough takes, both of them claimed they actually started to feel stoned. Whether that was the oregano or just the power of suggestion, nobody could say for certain. Number 9. The movie is Spielberg's childhood. Poltergeist is Steven Spielberg's personal nightmare given a studio budget. He said as much to Rolling Stone, drawing a clean line between the two films he released that summer. E.T. was his personal resurrection. Poltergeist was his personal terror. He named the specific fears: a clown doll, a dark closet, whatever might be living under the bed, and a tree outside his childhood window in New Jersey that seemed to reach toward him whenever the wind picked up. Every single one of those fears made it into the finished film. The movie only exists because another project collapsed first. After Close Encounters, Spielberg developed a horror follow-up called Night Skies about a family besieged by hostile aliens, hired John Sayles to write it, and then offered it to Tobe Hooper. Hooper didn't want aliens. He wanted ghosts. So they stripped out the extraterrestrials, and the gentle alien subplot got handed off separately to Melissa Matheson, who shaped it into E.T. Both films opened 1 week apart in the summer of 1982. Number 8. Richard Matheson never got his credit. Spielberg holds the sole story credit on Poltergeist. Richard Matheson holds none, and he had plenty to say about that over the years. Matheson's 1962 Twilight Zone episode, Little Girl Lost, centers on a girl who slips through her bedroom wall into another dimension. Her parents can hear her voice but cannot see her or reach her, and it ends with a parent crossing over to bring her back. Matheson got the idea the night his own daughter rolled under her bed, and he could hear her but couldn't locate her. By Matheson's own account, Spielberg had asked to borrow a copy of that episode years earlier because he wanted to adapt it. Matheson also pointed out that the parapsychologists arriving with scientific equipment to document the haunting came directly from his novel Hell House. He never sued, never made formal public demands, and has joked that Spielberg must have felt at least a little guilty because he kept hiring him anyway, eventually bringing him on as a creative consultant on amazing stories. Matheson wrote Duel, the TV movie that first put Spielberg on the map. The overlap between the two men's careers is extensive, and the credit situation on Poltergeist remains the one unresolved chapter. Number 7. Zelda Rubinstein shot 6 days and won. For years before she told Carol and not to go into the light, Zelda Rubinstein was running blood samples in a medical laboratory. She held a degree in bacteriology and spent years working as a lab technician before deciding at 45 that she needed something different. So she took an acting class. Her first film role was a small part in the 1981 comedy Under the Rainbow, and that performance got her noticed because Tangina had been written specifically for a short-statured actress. Spielberg wanted to make the point visually that a person's physical size had nothing to do with their authority or power. So, at 4'3", 49 years old, in only the second film she had ever appeared in, Rubinstein shot all of her scenes across 6 days and walked off with the entire picture. Pauline Kael dismissed Poltergeist as an entertaining mess, but stopped specifically to praise Rubinstein, saying Tangina breathed life into the film and carried large portions of it. The LA Times called Tangina the most original character in the movie. She won a Saturn Award. 6 days of work, and she outperformed people who had been there for months. Number 6. Nobody agrees who directed this movie. On May 24, 1982, the Los Angeles Times published a piece openly questioning who actually directed Poltergeist, and the film hadn't even opened yet. In it, Spielberg described Hooper as not naturally a take-charge presence, someone who would nod along while Spielberg stepped in with decisions whenever things needed to move quickly. Co-producer Frank Marshall stated in print that Steven was the creative force, that Tobe was present every day as the director, but that Steven had designed every storyboard and was also on set every day except 3 when he was in Hawaii with George Lucas. The Directors Guild opened a formal inquiry. Hooper kept his credit, but the Guild found that MGM's marketing had consistently shortchanged him by pushing Spielberg's name harder and ordered the studio to pay Hooper $15,000. 2 days before release, Spielberg sent Hooper a letter blaming the press for mischaracterizing their collaboration. Then there is Rubinstein's account, from someone who was actually standing on that set. Her version: Spielberg directed every one of the 6 days she worked. Hooper set up the shots. Spielberg adjusted them. 40 years on, and nobody is any closer to a clean answer. Number 5. The lawsuit that put everything on the record. Months after Poltergeist became a hit, writer Paul Clemens and his partner Bennett Michael Yellen filed a $37 million lawsuit claiming the premise had been taken from their unproduced treatment, Housebound, registered with the Writers Guild in September 1979. A family trapped in a house that swallows their youngest child, her voice coming from somewhere inside the walls. Their agent had sent it to Spielberg's office in January 1980. Their attorney counted 67 separate points of similarity. Spielberg's office maintained the treatment never arrived, and that is where the case collapsed. Nobody could prove delivery, and the judge kept it from going to a jury. The case settled 3 days before trial. Here is what 4 years of litigation actually produced. Under oath, the people who made this film had to explain exactly how it got made. The real skeletons. Who invented the face-ripping scene? Almost everything surprising you've read here tonight exists on the record because 2 writers you've never heard of sued Steven Spielberg and lost. Number 4. The PG rating was never supposed to happen. The MPAA originally rated Poltergeist R, and the reasoning was stranger than expected. The board chairman said the rating wasn't about violence. It was about terror. He specifically blamed the Dolby sound mix, arguing it trapped the audience inside the film and made the experience unbearable. MGM appealed because they needed teenagers in seats, and the appeals board voted overwhelmingly to drop it to PG. Not a single frame was removed. Nothing was softened or trimmed. An R-rated horror film became PG because a room of executives voted. The Dallas Film Classification Board then sued the day before release to block the film entirely, arguing it was unfit for anyone under 16. MGM countersued, kept advertising, and ran the film in 7 Dallas theaters throughout the legal fight. During a screening for the hearing, Jurors sat and watched Marty's face-ripping scene and compared it to the face-melting finale in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which that same Dallas board had cleared with a PG the previous year. Also a Spielberg picture. Dallas backed down. 2 years later, the MPAA introduced the PG-13 rating. The three films most often credited with forcing its creation are Poltergeist, Temple of Doom, and Gremlins. Spielberg directed one and produced the other two. Number 3. The curse was never a curse. 4 deaths connected to the Poltergeist trilogy over 6 years. The people who were actually closest to those deaths have spent decades pushing back against the mythology rather than feeding it. Dominique Dunne, who played the eldest Freeling daughter, was 22 years old when she was killed by her ex-boyfriend in October 1982. He was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and released in under 4 years. Julian Beck, who played the villain in Poltergeist 2, died of stomach cancer in 1985 at 60. He was already aware of his diagnosis when he accepted the role. Will Sampson from that same film died in 1987 at 53 from surgical complications related to a degenerative illness he had been managing for years. Heather O'Rourke was 12 when she died in February 1988, misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease when what she actually had was a congenital intestinal defect that went undetected until it was too late. Cancer, a degenerative illness, a surgical complication, a misdiagnosis, for entirely documented, entirely earthly causes. Craig Reardon, the effects artist most frequently blamed in curse discussions, has said plainly that he does not believe in curses and that it genuinely troubles him to see his props used to sensationalize the deaths of real families grieving real losses. Number 2. The house had one take. For the film's finale, the Freeling house needed to collapse inward and disappear entirely. ILM constructed it as a 6-foot-wide miniature, detailed all the way down to individual shingles, and mounted the whole structure vertically. The camera was positioned above it, shooting at 300 frames per second. Steel cables ran out through the bottom. On the signal, the cables tore the house apart from below while a floor-mounted vacuum held all the debris inward and out of frame, creating the illusion that the structure was being consumed rather than destroyed. One take. Not one preferred take with a backup waiting. One singular, unrepeatable take. The model disintegrated in roughly 2 seconds, and there was no second house anywhere on the lot. Months of detailed construction work, gone in a moment. In the screening room, as the footage played and the house came apart on screen, the projectionist, someone who watches films professionally every day and has seen nearly everything, called out loud from up in the booth. Spielberg heard him from the seats below and understood immediately that they had the shot. Number 1. The scariest thing in Poltergeist is Spielberg's own hands. Marty in the bathroom, fingers digging into his own face in the mirror. It is the most viscerally disturbing sequence in the film and has been used for 40 years as the central argument that Poltergeist was never really a PG movie.
There are 2 things to know about that scene.
The first you already know from earlier tonight. Nobody wrote it. Michael McCracken invented it standing on that set floor while the crew was working on something else nearby, and the only reason that fact is on the record is because a lawsuit forced him to say so under oath. He has a makeup credit. The idea itself has no credited owner. The second thing involves the hands. For 4 decades, audiences have assumed the hands tearing into Marty's face belong to Martin Casella, the actor playing him. They do not. The effects team built exactly one lifelike bust of Casella's head.
1.
When it came time to film the close-up of that face being pulled apart, the person who reached into frame and did it was Steven Spielberg himself. He borrowed Casella's watch and ring beforehand so the hands would match. By Casella's own account, Spielberg had the time of his life doing it. So consider everything you've just read. The Los Angeles Times piece. The Directors Guild inquiry. The lawsuit. 40 years of debate over how much of Poltergeist actually belongs to Steven Spielberg. There is one answer nobody can dispute. It is inside the film and has been inside every copy since 1982. The scariest thing in Poltergeist is Steven Spielberg's own 2 hands.